Focusing on the client experience and the employee experience are two critical things to focus on when you're growing a civil engineering company. In this week's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me CEO and co-founder of Gessner Engineering, Johanna Gessner, and Johanna is going to tell us how she takes a high payoff approach to focus on these two critical areas. Before we jump in with Johanna, a quick word from our sponsor, BigTime.
Oh my God, this is amazing. I love it.
Got it. Wow, Dave, this is amazing. This is really, really cool.
The software is great. I love this program.
These are the real reactions of BigTime customers when they first toured the software. BigTime gives engineering firms the visibility they need to operate more efficiently and maximize profits. From project creation to client payments, BigTime streamlines operations with intuitive budgeting, project management, and invoicing solutions. Schedule your tour of the #1 rated professional services automation software at bigtime.net. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the Civil Engineering CEO today, Johanna Gessner, CEO and co-founder at Gessner Engineering. Johanna, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thank you for having me.
So just to start off here, Johanna, tell us about your company, where you're located, what you do, how many offices, employees you have.
So Gessner Engineering is located in Texas. We have 5 locations in Bryan, Texas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Georgetown, and Brenham. We do civil engineering, structural engineering, geotechnical engineering, surveying, and construction materials testing.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about kind of your journey in starting the company and going from there to where you are today, just a little bit about kind of your career path.
Absolutely. So my husband and I met in college, and I have a degree in business, and he is a civil engineer with structural emphasis. Thomas is much more the visionary, and I'm much more of an executor. And whenever we were going to be married, we talked about what our path would be, and it was we wanted to own a civil engineering firm. So we had that opportunity far younger than we had intended to have the opportunity. The gentleman that Thomas worked for came and asked if we would like to buy it. I was 27 and he was 29. And there were only 12 people in the company at the time. We were also just beginning to have our family. So I was not involved initially, but the plan was always for me to be involved. And then as soon as the younger of our 2 children got into like a preschool, about 2 or 3 years old, then I became involved. And we each have our strength zones, and I'm much more well suited, I'd say. And if you ask our partners, to doing the executing and managing things in my role, and Thomas he works on a lot of the stuff outside of the business. Each of our partners has a specific role. So mine is a lot into the development. We talked about that when we had our initial call. And over the last few years, this journey has really taken shape for me, because I've come to appreciate through some organizational development how incredibly impactful that is to an organization and to the individual.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm excited to talk to you today, because I think all of the guests that we've had on the show so far have been civil engineers that are CEOs of a civil firm. And it's great to have a non-engineer who serves as the CEO, just to get a different perspective. I think that is important. And so let me ask you this question, Johanna. How would they describe your management style?
I am very enthusiastic and encouraging, and I'm big on accountability and expectation management. We did an exercise in leadership development. We have our senior leadership team meets every other week, and we had to write down words that we think we say that describe us a lot. And mine were expectation management was one of them, and the other was well done. So, yeah.
That's great. And so we've had a pretty crazy past couple of years here. Everyone has with COVID, of course, but also in civil engineering, things have been extremely busy, maybe busier than ever. Talk a little bit about being a leader in a civil engineering firm over these past few years and how you can kind of try to stay as even keeled as possible and not overreact, not underreact when people are kind of looking at you for how you're responding to some of the things that are going on right now?
Right. So that all ties into leadership because you want to set the example. And all you can do is work the problem. So you can have your moment and fuss if you need to, or whatever, take a walk. But at the end of the day, you have to solve the problem. And one of our greatest problems is finding great people. Once we do, they stick around and we form a relationship. We've had people who've been here for a very long time, but it's finding really great people and having them understand what we're trying to do here with our leadership and engagement with the team. We're not a grind them up firm where we just have people work a ton of hours. We're trying to working all the time to have it that we work less hours and bill greater, and our stats are showing that trend is working out for us.
That's great. How many employees roughly do you have right now?
85.
85?
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Congrats. That's great.
Thanks.
So let's talk about technology for a minute. I mean, you have obviously a growing company of 85 people. We all went through COVID where a lot of things went virtual, if not everything, for some period of time. But technology continues to evolve in the civil engineering world. There's all kinds of software that are available, new programs. How does your company stay on top of that, monitor that, decide what technology to take on? Talk about that a little bit from your perspective.
Right. So a lot of research, and we do engage in certain conferences. We've been into drone technology from the very beginning, which the timeline speeds up incredibly. We have a surveying firm. We have a surveying department in-house, which sometimes with a civil engineering firm and working so closely with survey, they're waiting for the outsourced survey. But if we can go ahead and fly the site with a drone and bring that data in, they can start to do some work ahead of time while it's still just some preliminary work, which changes the timeline significantly. Out at Texas A&M, there's a campus called Rellis that we've done all of the infrastructure for. It was an old World War II Air Force base where they did training, and it was this pretty well raw piece of land with some crummy old runways on it and a few pre-engineered or like old metal buildings. So we were able to, it was a very tight timeline. We do a lot of public work, and the university, Texas A&M University, wanted that done quickly. We were able to shave 5 weeks off the timeline by having flown it with the drone, bringing that information in and starting to process it, put us so far ahead. There are other things as well, but in terms of something that's been a large gain, that's been huge for us.
Wow, that's great. And that sounds like it's something that really provides a greater value and benefit to your clients, right? Because you can get projects done quicker. It's helpful for your workflow and the productivity of your project management process, which is great. And so you mentioned monitoring. So I guess you just have to stay on top of these different technologies and then make decisions as to which ones to use and which not to use.
Right. So in terms of where the firm is going, my husband is quite he's just an innovator, and so really does keep up with those things, talks to people, does a lot of business development, is most, again, where we're heading outside the business. And then we have one of our partners is operations, and the other one is client experience, making sure that what we have promised is what's being delivered and noodling out any problems. Most of my role is development of staff, and so that non-technical component. So for the keeping up with technology, operations, and then Thomas is CDO, Chief Development Officer. Those two are really on top of that. And then they work with the different leadership of each department to stay on top of those things.
That's great. It sounds like you have a great structure and a great process for doing things like that, which I think is, hugely important, especially I think for a firm of your size. Obviously if there's a firm that has 1,000 people, they can have probably departments upon departments, right, for IT and technology and things of that nature. But when you're running leaner than that, obviously you need to have a good process. And it sounds like you do. And I think what's great about that is, like Johanna said there, the technology, you have to select what technology is going to work for your firm because you can't use everything. There's new things coming out every day. And I think thinking about how it impacts your project delivery and also how it impacts your clients, because that's really what this is all about, is who can deliver the most value for their clients. And I think that that's a great way to decide on which technology you should use and maybe which you should pass on. But another thing that I think Johanna said that's important is you have to think about where you want to be in 5 years from now in terms of technology. You have to think about where you're headed in the future and also use that as a way to decide which technology is going to get you there. I mean, I know that we do that here at EMI. You know, we may not be that big yet, but we know we want to go there. So we need to start to put some infrastructure in place, or else we may not be able to make that leap. So for those of you out there trying to constantly stay on top of that, you know, I think those are good things to remember. And the one other thing that I'll mention from talking with a lot of leaders in civil engineering companies is you also want to be aware that you're not going to get technology that's too complicated for your staff to use. And then they get to the point where they just don't use it because it's too complicated and it's going to take me much longer to do my job. So I think that that's
Correct.
you want to be aware
Well,
of.
and you use the word value. So we talk about what's a high payoff activity for us. What's a high value? So what's really going to be your bang for your buck? And does it matter to the client? It has to matter and add value, not only internally, but externally when you're choosing what you're going to invest in, because frankly, some of these technologies are quite the investment. And so you have to make sure that what's that going to do with my return? Is the staff going to utilize it? What kind of value is it going to add overall to the deliverable and the experience?
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that kind of speaks to, in my opinion, the two most important things of growing any company, which is the client experience and the employee experience, right? And those two things have to be great for the company to be able to grow. And obviously, Johanna, it sounds like you're very focused on both of them, especially the employee experience in terms of the learning and development and making sure that your people grow. And again, I think you can tie everything back to those two, the technology being one of those things. So let's talk a little bit about kind of remote work, right? Remote work came about a few years ago, like I mentioned before with COVID. Talk a little bit about how going through that process has changed your company and how it may impact you going forward.
So I struggled a long time to think about this remote work situation because technically you can work from anywhere for the most part when you're doing this type of work. However, I feel where I landed ultimately is I feel that remote work is a killer of culture. And it also interferes with training. So we have several closed spaces, but we have an open office environment for our teams. And when they're working in that open environment, I don't care if they put in headphones so if they need to concentrate or if they need to go into one of the little conference rooms to work, no problem. But overall, if you're working on a project and somebody's right next to you and you can say, wait, let's talk about this, you know, you're chunking your time and you're scheduling together. And there's no better way than that human interaction. And when I just see this little window, like I'm looking at you, I can kind of gauge how you're feeling, but I'm not getting the whole picture. Are you tapping your foot? Are you kind of starting to cringe a little bit? And so I could have a conversation with somebody virtually, but not really have the whole picture of how they are taking on what I'm saying. It's difficult, and communication is difficult anyway. And then when you put somebody in a window, it just takes that human side away. Now, that being said, we absolutely have allowed it. Like if there's somebody in our office whose kids are still young and the challenge is like sometimes they're off on days that is not a holiday, absolutely work from home. Or we had a team member that is from South Korea and she hadn't seen her family because of COVID in years and went home for a month, and we worked it out for her to be able to work. And it was an experiment. It worked beautifully. We have another team member whose family's from Maine. She goes up there every summer and she works remotely for 6 weeks. So for those cases, for the employee or team member, I actually like to say to live their best life. Absolutely. Because in my opinion, and our philosophy is work is a great thing, but it should be part of your life. It's a tool that you use, right? Because how many of us would just show up for funsies? No, we're using this so that we can do whatever is our best life. And for us not to be flexible on that would be getting in the way of the best life. But overall, I am not a fan of working remotely as a long-term business solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. So the philosophy is, let's try to get people together as much as possible, but we are flexible in certain situations, right, where it's needed. So generally speaking, though, at this point in time, your offices are open and pretty much back going.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
Yes.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think that speaks again to that employee experience, right? Like Johanna mentioned, someone has to go home, they have to visit people, they have things going on, the company can flex and work with them. And I'd like to think that one of the positives of COVID was that more companies are able to make that, be flexible in that way right now because the infrastructure that's in place now. But I also agree that, especially in the civil engineering world, I mean, it's really a people-oriented world where we're constantly trying to meet people, meet our clients, go to project sites. So it is very beneficial to do what we can in person. And it's good to see a lot of companies kind of getting back to that.
I would like to say during COVID, we honored whatever was either the law at the time or people had different sensitivities to it. So even when some people were comfortable coming back, the others weren't. Absolutely, we allowed, no problem. But now with vaccines and everything, we're back. We're pretty well spread out within each office. We're not on top of each other. So I just want to put a clarifier in there that we were more than understanding and worked within the COVID restrictions.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. And I like the approach of, once we're kind of past COVID or getting out of COVID, trying to get back if we can in a lot of ways to that in-person environment with the opportunities for people to be flexible as needed. I just think it can kind of work well for everybody.
Right.
So Johanna, let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. We know
Sure.
Texas is a state with a lot of infrastructure, a lot of land, a lot of civil engineering work for sure. And of course, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed recently, which is going to bring $1 trillion of funding to infrastructure across the country. And I'm sure Texas is going to be getting a good amount of that. Talk about kind of that and what that looks like. What are the prospects for Texas? What are you seeing from where you sit?
So we're quite fortunate. We've been very busy, but more work than, and knock on wood, right? That we've been so fortunate with a lot of work, quite a bit for counties and public work for us. Brazos County, where we live, is a big part of it, and we do quite a bit of the road and infrastructure. So we've actually done work with them for years, and it's just been good, steady work that we've seen, and we do continue to go after that. We enjoy the public work because the end user cares about the product very much, and so that's been our bailiwick, is to go after that infrastructure. So the business development is the whole business development team very closely reads all of those budgets and things that come out, and then works with other teams so that we're ready when those end up being RFQs and SOQs, and so we know about them and are teamed up before they hit.
That's great. And so would you say that you've been for a while now just really busy?
Yes, it slowed down, like for everybody over COVID, that slowed down. And then now we're picking back up. For instance, and I know this is a civil engineering focus, but surveying and then like our drilling calendar are out quite a long ways. And if you even try to call somebody else to help you with the drilling, they're out too. So we're just seeing, and it's like nothing we have experienced. So we'll turn 19 in November, and we've not experienced schedules or work like this in the past night, like we're experiencing right now.
Let me ask you a question about that. I think this is an interesting topic in terms of surveying in civil engineering. I started my career doing surveying, and then I became a professional engineer, worked at a company that had both. To me, having a survey component in a civil engineering firm is very valuable in a lot of ways. And a lot of times surveying is the first component of a project, right? So if you get the survey, you have a great inside track to getting the project. You also can work back and forth between the departments. Maybe for those out there that might have small civil firms, or maybe they're starting their own, they're very small, maybe you could talk about the value of having a surveying component in a civil engineering firm for a minute.
Well, it's direct access, right? And priority to be able to get on the schedule. The jobs that, as you know, as a civil engineer, there's generally a lot larger budgets than just a straight up survey job that somebody off the street calls and they want a surveying job. there's just not as much in the budget. So it's actually financially far more beneficial for us not only to have it in-house, but then to wrap it underneath civil as part of their budget versus it's a skinnier budget when it's just a freestanding survey. And it's really nice because when you have, and I know people can develop these relationships with surveyors that they utilize regularly, but when you're in the same building and you can talk to them and they know, let's say this PM likes such and such, or I can call them and they know, they're real responsive all the time. We have a relationship. I can quick ask a question. What am I looking for here exactly? And it's a lot more comfortable. I mean, when you work with clients regularly, how you have that rapport, and it's quite easy. And so that becomes the advantage, not only civil survey, but a lot of our, like for structural and geo, those two are tied together. And it's really nice for them too, to be able to lean on each other when they need information.
Yeah,
and I don't know if that quite answered your question, but
no, it's great. It's perfect. And, I have some friends that are civil engineers and licensed surveyors, and they've started their own companies, and having the two skill sets, the two professions has really served them very well in terms of building a business and doing business development, just because you have another area of expertise that helps you get in the door on projects, that helps you kind of branch out. And so,
and I think I don't know if you're aware, so the Texas Society or the surveying has been moved underneath the board, the engineering board in Texas. So it's all one thing now.
That's great. Yeah, I've seen that in some states where they do have surveying and engineering together.
Yes.
In fact, they do that in New York, where I have my license as well. So it is good to see that in some states that they do that. All right, so let me ask you this question, Johanna. There's a lot of talk right now in the industry about diversity and inclusion. And I just wanted to ask you, what does that mean to you? How does your firm support that?
Sure. So large firms have resume. We're a woman-owned firm, and there's no possible way that we would have gotten a seat at the table, really, without some of the programs that are available for small and minority-owned firms. So that has allowed us to be part of some fabulous projects and to build our resume so that we could compete on our own. But without those, they would not have happened either at all or as quickly as it has. We have 22% of our full-time engineers are women. We have 5 department heads, 3 of them are women, and we have 4 partners and 2 of them are women. So I'm one of them. So we happen to have a lot of females. And I think when we started the process, I was talking to the Vice President of Client Experience, Sarah. She's one of the partners. And I said, why do you think this is so different, that we're having really great success with leadership development and buy-in? And she said, if there's a lot of women in this room, and there are in our senior leadership team, lots of women. And if it was a room full of fellas, I don't know that we would have had the same trajectory of buy-in as we do with that leadership, having the diversity of females in there, which is a little unusual in the industry. It's getting better. But like when I was younger, they didn't have, I'm 45, and whenever I was younger, they didn't do the STEM things. There weren't these programs. Not that that's an excuse, but I'm just saying, so I think it's taking the industry a little while to catch up, which is nice that there are some opportunities for us to get our foot in the door and then build on our success.
Well, that's great. And and I think well, first of all, it's great to hear you talk about some of the statistics in your own company, because that is promising. And I think it is trending, what I've seen in that direction in a lot of the companies that we work with. But I do think that it is 2 parts to it. One, like you said, if there isn't STEM programs out there, in elementary school, starting early, it's hard for people to get exposure, both boys and girls, but especially girls, to get them out there and get them exposed to it. And the second part of it is, what industry and what companies are doing and how they can encourage it within their firms. And it sounds like at Gessner, obviously, you're doing a great job of that. I mean, you as a woman who's a leader in the firm, but then just taking us through the stats, 3 of the 5 division leads are women, right? And I think that only helps, because then you hire new people and they say, wow, 3 or 5 division managers or leaders, I have the ability to do that as well, right? And so it's kind of like leading by example. And so it's good to hear you, talk about the trends in your firm. And I have seen personally, just over the last 10, 12 years, working with a lot of civil firms, looking at the leadership structures, I think we are seeing more women on the website when you click on About Us or Leadership, which is a good thing. I mean, I think we need to keep going, but I think it is trending in the right direction.
I agree.
All right, Johanna, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that we often get asked by civil engineering professionals.
Sure.
First question, what is the number one trait that you feel is important for civil engineering professionals to have today?
Be open to change.
It's a good one, especially these last few years.
That is it. It may or may not work, but if you consider something and are open to trying it, maybe a new process, a new technology, people just in general, we do personality assessments, and for no other reason than just for self-awareness and to help with communication. I think they're fabulous tools. They're accessible to everybody. Civil engineering tends to self-select. We happen to use DISC. There's lots of great ones out there, and the type of person that tends to be drawn to civil engineering is a person that does not like change, likes order, likes predictability. And so when you try to get somebody like that to change, it's really difficult. So the number one trait is to be, in my opinion, is to be open. Like, let's talk about how this could possibly work instead of starting to list the reasons it wouldn't immediately. And that's something when I work with my team, I'll say, okay, you can't tell me reasons this isn't going to work. Maybe it won't, but let's start with that being open and let's get our minds right there. And that's such a valuable thing, because sometimes change doesn't work, but sometimes it has fabulous results. You have to be open to it.
No, that's great. And I really like the idea of using the assessments, because I do feel like you can give it, others insights into the people that you work with, and how can I communicate with them best, and how do they need to hear things from me? One person's different than another. So that's great to hear. And, I think that's just another kind of value point too, of having someone who's not an engineer as someone on your, on your leadership, as part of your executive leadership. I mean, I think having some engineers as part of your executive leadership is a good thing, but you need different perspectives, right?
Are, half or not. So 2 of us are not engineers.
There you go. So, it gives you that blend of different perspectives that I think are so important when you're trying to grow a firm.
Yeah.
And, definitely being open to change is something that I think right now more than ever is a great trait to have. All right, another question that we get often from civil engineers is, how can I make sure I'm adding value to my organization? How would you answer that?
So am I either developing myself and or someone else? And by doing so, then I can make another person more efficient. So for instance, if I'm developing myself or asking to be developed in my skill set, then I can start to take things off of my project manager or supervisor that then allows them to do other things. And so it's a big thing when you can alleviate a stressor for somebody. And I think that developing yourself allows you to do that. That making somebody else more efficient and giving them time is huge. I mean, so one thing you can't get back, it's, you can't buy more time. So that's a big thing, is to develop yourself so that you can help somebody be more efficient, somebody else be more efficient.
That's great. I mean, I really love that. I mean, our guiding principles here at EMI are give, guide, grow. We give our all, we guide each other, we grow together. And I think growth is so important. And if you're growing every day, or you're helping someone grow, basically the company's growing and everyone's going to kind of be able to work together. So I really like the idea of, how can I either grow myself or help someone else grow? And really that's good, because at some levels of your career, like if you're a recent graduate, you're not really able to probably help too many other people yet, because you're just learning, but at least you can learn. Like Johanna said, you can ask for guidance, ask for development, and grow yourself at that point, and get to the point where you can start to help other people, start to mentor other people, start to help other people grow. So I think the growth mindset is certainly a good one. So Johanna, if someone came up to you within your company and said, what is one business challenge that I can solve that would make the single biggest impact at Gessner? How would you answer that question?
Focus on high payoff activities.
Sounds like that's a big theme for you.
It is. Well, if you can tell, sometimes you'll look on a timesheet, and if it looks scattershot, that how beneficial is that, right? And generally the projects that on which they're working are not, what can you get done in half an hour? That's weird, right? That doesn't make sense. How can you really engage with what you're on, unless it was a phone call or something quick? But if you're actually doing some production, I should see chunked time. And so am I focusing? We talk about what's imperative and important every day. But in the morning I personally do, and we encourage our teams to do kind of where am I? Just acknowledge where you are, what's on my mind, how am I feeling before I start my day, and what are my imperatives and importance. And really, you shouldn't have more than 2 or 3 imperatives have to get done that day. And then important is just a bonus, right? Just an extra lap. If I happen to be able to do it, that's fantastic. So the same thing should be done with a team member as they're looking at their week and day. Get yourself centered. What is my high payoff activity? I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to turn off all of my notifications. I'm going to we use Teams. On Teams, I'm going to put my schedule and say focus time this, and I'll be available for questions, because technology takes away from that focus and gets in the way of us getting those imperative things done. Then we get panicked. We don't think through things. So that's the high payoff activity is the one thing.
No, I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I do think that we do that here at EMI. We call them MITs, right? What are my most important tasks? Figure them out every morning, and there should be 2 or 3, and it shouldn't be more than that. You should focus on those first, because if you get those done, you get the high payoff, right? You don't want to get distracted by other things. But what I like to hear you talk about is the challenge of distractions in the world that we live in today. Whether you're remote or not, you're probably using some kind of messaging service, Slack, Teams, whatever the case may be. And it's easy for people to try to access you all day long. And unless you are guarded against that, like Johanna said, you put your out of office on, you put a message on, you close that down, it can be very distracting, and it can prevent us from trying to do that deep work over hours at a time, which is really important work in the world of engineering. I mean, most likely, if you're doing a report, if you're doing an analysis, if you're doing some drawings, you're going to need a couple of hours of time to be able to think through them. And every time you stop, it slows you down tremendously, because then you got to get back into it again. And there's that kind of that startup time. So that's a great piece of advice. Focus on those high payoff activities at any expense. And why I like to hear you as the CEO talk about it is because I think there has to be that understanding on both sides of the equation, is that you can't expect someone to get a whole bunch of work done and then sit there and message them all day and expect to hear back from them right away. So there has to be some kind of understanding between managers and a team that, hey, listen, I'm going to give you a couple hours every morning so you can focus on your high payoff tasks, and then we can come together in the afternoon or first thing in the morning. And you need to kind of put that structure in place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you teach people how to treat you. And so if at any level, if you respond every time somebody sends you something, then they're going to continue to do that. And if they know that you have a consistent schedule, I answer emails from 7 to 8 or whatever the person's schedule is, because they can choose, as long as it's semi-consistent. Then some of your clients, your team members know, plus then you have it in your little schedule. But it's terribly distracting to have that back and forth, and you can't ever really it's very well said. Yeah, you and I are right there with that. Yeah.
So do you have recommended times to kind of batch check your email and stuff like that?
I think it's specific to the person. So for me, I'll do it kind of morning, lunch, and then kind of 3 times. In between, I might look at it, but it does not rule my day. So I'll look at, and of course, if something pops up and I need to rearrange my schedule because something really emergent happened, I'll do so. But I try to honor my schedule the very best I can, and be very intentional with my time. I'll put my schedule on Teams, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and so on, so that people know when they message me. And then same thing for focus time. So I believe in actually scheduling time with yourself, an appointment with yourself, if you needed to review something, if you need to work on something. So just as you would make an appointment with a client, you would say 1 to 2:30, this is the things I'm working on. And I'll even, when I do that, I'll even put notes in the body of this is what I want to do, and it might be a week out that I'm going to schedule it. So that way it's on the calendar and I made the time for it, and then everybody else can see that it's on the calendar.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm asking you about that just because I feel like everything you just explained is great, but I think it's difficult for people to do. And I think companies assume people can do that and don't have the conversation with them. So I think giving guidance to people around some strategies or best practices, which it sounds like you do in the mornings with the high payoff tasks and talk about it with people, I think is important, because I think that it can be very easy for a manager, like I said before, to continue to kind of be on top of people all day long and not give them that bandwidth to do those things.
Right.
And then it becomes hard for them to create the habit. So you kind of need to teach someone that first, that you can't assume that people know how to schedule things with themselves. I mean, it is a great
So you
thing
have
to
to
do.
provide the instruction and accountability. So our senior leadership team meets every other week for 3 hours. And then I meet with the leaders of each department every other week. And I talk to them, how's your staff doing? What are their challenges? How are you keeping them accountable? So they'll say, this project manager is thriving and having some issues over here, and here's what we're doing. So I'm coaching the coaches and asking them, so if you're telling them to chunk their time and they're having difficulties, why? Can you talk to them about it? You don't just say things and it happens. Change takes time and accountability, and it has to go from me to the leadership and on down. And then you just got to over and over keep encouraging people, and because people will mess up. And when we get stressed, we go back to our default settings, which is, we're going to answer all these emails, and that doesn't work. So we have to calm back down, remind ourselves, check back in, and it happened, so that's why we have touch points constantly, so meeting with them all the time. So I have a handle on, at this point in stage of time with our level of, or number of people, I still have a handle on what's happening.
That's great. So Johanna, a lot of things in the civil engineering world right now are very good. A lot of the companies we talk to are doing well. They're busy. They're hiring people. Is there anything that worries you about the civil engineering industry that you're thinking about or you're aware of?
Absolutely. Burnout, grinding people up, having them just work, and you have to have some downtime. People that are working, if they say they're billing 40 or hours, they're working far more than that, right? Or they're lying. And so, or fibbing, I guess, so that sound a little less harsh. So then what does that life look like? And what kind of hours am I getting out of somebody from 40 to 60? So if you're billing 40, you're working probably 60. What is the liability of that? What does that do to a person over time? And forget just work. Now, if they have families or homes or something they want to do afterwards, what kind of energy and time? And we need those things for our brain to defrag, like a computer. Every day, we've got to have some downtime to, renew our emotional energy and get ourselves back right for the next day. Brain powers a lot. It asks a lot of you. And so burnout is a very real thing that we have to be concerned about for the person. People will have left the industry, engineers, when this was not what I thought. I'm working all the time. We've talked to former interns who just said this isn't what I thought, and it was too much. And so companies need to be very cognizant of these are people and how many hours and we're asking them to work.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And we do a lot of post session evaluations on a lot of the learning and development programs that we give. And one of the questions we put in there a lot, just for feedback for our clients, is what can your company do to help you be happier and more engaged at work? And I can't tell you how many times people say, hire more people, because it's just too much work for us to do. And I think that one of the challenges in the civil engineering world is so many companies will say, we're busy, we're hiring, we're busy, we're hiring. The problem too is that, like, with all this infrastructure funding and everything, it's only going to get busier. So
I don't think hiring, yes, you need people, but that's not necessarily the entire solution.
Right.
we're noticing a bit of a trend, not only with, we have friends that are also owners of other businesses. And when you sit around and, you might meet for a drink or something and you chat, how you talk shop, right? And we're seeing augmentation, outsourcing, automation. These allow us to have gains without necessarily hiring another person. So yes, at some point you absolutely have to have the staff on board, but you can get a lot of things done with, so where, again, my high payoff activity, does it make the most sense for the engineering team to be really thinking about solving the problem, working through the communication with the client, or spending time in drawing things? I mean, like, right, we can outsource some of those things, and we work with teams and other, we outsource to other, we started this with a guy that he worked for us for a long time in Texas, and then he went back home to Panama. And then he knew how we worked, and we started working with him and a team down there. And then we had a relationship with another firm in Argentina, and we work with them, and it's great work for them, and it's good for us. It's a mutually beneficial thing. They're smart, we vet them, and they're able to help us with chunks of things that are less of a high payoff activity for us. And then, like, for instance, in our surveying department, we're working on field to finish. It's something that they can tie in more quickly when they go in the field. It's automation, right? When they come in to process in the office and what's going to become the drawings. And so that's great uses of technology, because those are huge gains, and we didn't have to put extra human hours to them. Now when we got set up with the augmentation, that takes work to get that to work correctly. But once it does, now I'm not taxing my people in the same way.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's one of those things, you set it up the right way once, and then it keeps returning on itself over and over. And even back to what you were talking about before, just an individual's personal productivity itself can help people avoid burnout, or, you don't need to hire another person. 3 or 4 people there just can get a little bit more productive, and you're almost going to kind of, get that out of it. So there's definitely different ways to look at it. So, all right, a couple of just final questions more about yourself, Johanna. You talked about kind of your kind of philosophy of the high payoff tasks and focusing on those. When you come to the office each day, how do you decide what to work on? How do you prioritize those tasks? Do you go through a process? What does that look like for you?
So some of my tasks are repeat, like my meetings are on my calendar for bi-weekly. If it has to do with an individual, like the development of somebody, that's a high priority. So right now I'm working with the survey team on some things, and I thought I want to spend a day with them in the field. So I really wanted to not only, I know them, but like really spend some time, ask questions, watch what they do, experience it. And so I asked one of the guys, I was like, hey, Garrett, can I hang with you this next week? I was up here real early yesterday. I spent the whole day in the field. I got to learn a bunch of stuff. And yesterday was a drone day, and I'm going to schedule another day to go back and do a proper survey, like where you're actually, thought I was going to get some steps in yesterday. I didn't. But that is a high priority. That's an example of something that would take priority. If it has to do with people, because when you're in a service industry, your people are everything, then you need to get in and get involved. And so that is what takes precedence for me, is if it has to do with people. If it's a task that I can, if it's something that, like a policy, I don't need to be messing around with writing a policy. I would love to review it and be in on maybe the thought of it, but that's not a high payoff activity for me.
That's great. And that's really a great process, right? Like really being clear on what is a high payoff for you and what's not. And I think everybody obviously will have different answers to that question, but just going through the thought process can really help you when you set yourself up in every day and every week, when you try to outline, where your focus is gonna be. So that's great. Do you have a favorite book that over the years has stuck out for you, that you use it on a regular basis?
Yeah, I love The Martian. And the reason I love The Martian is, and there's a movie, you've probably seen it, but the book is fabulous. And the great thing about it is, so this guy stuck in I know it's fiction, right? But he's stuck in a difficult situation, and he could pitch a fit or he can get to problem solving. And at the end of the day, as we both, like I said earlier, you can have your moment, but then you've got to suck it up and problem solve. And if you can do it with a happy heart, the best you can, it's going to make everything a little better. So, he kind of had a fun attitude. He tried not to get over. Again, I get it. It's fiction, but that personality, when you've been around people with whom you've had the opportunity to work and they're positive, they have a happy heart, and instead of freaking out about something, they see it, well, this is an opportunity to problem solve and we're going to do it. And that book is an example of that. And I love that philosophy.
I'll have to check it out. Honestly, I've never heard of it. So I need
The Martian?
No, yeah, I haven't.
It's really good. Yeah.
I'll check it out. All right. One last question I have for you. Obviously as a CEO, you're kind of sitting in a leadership role in the company, and you're focused on developing people, but obviously you also have to continue to develop yourself. And so how does one do that at your level? Are there other CEOs you talk to and get together with? Do you go to events? Like, what does the development process for someone who sits in a CEO seat look like?
So things changed for me when we started working with the Management Connection, and they've been in business for 30 years and they do leadership development and organizational development. So I started working with a gentleman named Joe Gonzalez, and then the partners and I all work with him, and I meet with him bi-weekly, and I call him my business therapist. But I talk through, sometimes I have an agenda when I go, sometimes I talk through acute problems, but it's nice because he has such experience in leadership and development, and he can be a good guide and sounding board and get me where I need to be. Other than that, I rely very heavily on my three partners. So Thomas, Jeremy, and Sarah. And I think I told you when we had our quick call, it's like heart or lungs, which is more important. You've got to have them both. But we are a team and we all need each other. And we all have our own strength zone in place. And so I can rely on them when I'm struggling to, like, if I need to talk to somebody or talk through something. And we have some friends too that are actual CEOs of companies that sometimes will talk shop. So it's nice to have those resources.
That's great. Well, Johanna Gessner, CEO and co-founder of Gessner Engineering, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to spend some time with me here on the Civil Engineering CEO.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Johanna. Focusing on the client experience and the employee experience is so important to the growth and health of a company, and it was exciting to hear how Gessner Engineering is doing it. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. Please consider subscribing to our channel here so we can help you engineer your own success. I'll see you next week.